I spent 5 hours deeply analyzing hundreds and hundreds of my own ad sets so I could definitively answer for you how important is it to actually leave the learning phase. So when you launch an ad set, it will go into the learning phase and then it'll either move to active or learning limited. So I actually calculated the exact number of sales and profit for ones that move to active as well as ones that move to the learning limited, and the results may surprise you quite a bit. So briefly, what is the learning phase and why does it matter? Anytime you are launching a new campaign and new ads, it will go into the learning phase. And with each campaign, you have the campaign objective, where basically you're saying, hey, Facebook, I want you to try to find people who are the most likely to take this action. So that could be like click on the link, that could be download an app. I generally use lead and purchase just because that's ultimately the action that I want people to take to make money. So as it's showing it to more and more people, it will show it to people and then it'll find 20 people who, let's say, make a purchase. It's going to get a lot better at finding the right people to show it to get you a purchase. So for each ad set that you have, to exit the learning phase, the general rule is you're trying to get 50 of those conversions within 1 week. So it's pretty easy if you're specifically doing link clicks, and it's a lot harder if you're optimizing for purchases, especially if like it costs you $50 to get a new purchase. That means that you're going to need to spend, somewhere around $2,500 per ad set to actually hit those 50 purchases in a week. And if you have 4 different ad sets under your campaign, you could be looking at spending $10,000 for that one campaign, which is especially tricky if you're trying out brand new ads that no one has seen before. Whereas if it's link clicks, you can usually get those for under $1. So you could spend $50 a week on that ad set and actually hit that learning phase. Even though the general rule is if you hit those 50 conversions in a week, you should move to active, and if you don't, you should move to learning limited, this is often not the case. Sometimes it can be a little all over the place. I can have only run for a day or two and generated 3 purchases, and sometimes it'll move to active, sometimes it'll move to learning limited, and what it moves to, it stays at that. So if you run an ad for 6 months and it's learning limited, it will just stay at learning limited. And a lot of people have quite a bit of stress. They're like, no, it needs to be active. I didn't do the learning phase. I have to start over. So let's actually start to get into some of the data that I pulled on the performance of active versus learning limited. So across the hundreds of ad sets, I found that the ones that exited the learning phase, moving to active instead of learning limited, performed 14.89% better, but that is not the entire story. Because as I dug more and more into the ad sets, I realized that the ones that we launched and tested out that kind of underperformed weren't getting a lot of sales, which meant they eventually got paused or just underperformed to the point that they got moved to learning limited. I actually now believe that it moving to active or moving to learning limited doesn't actually cause it to perform worse. Just instead, if something is already underperforming and just isn't as good of an ad, it's a little bit more likely to end up in the learning limited because you'll be getting a lot less great results. So for example, if you have a product and you're trying to get out of the learning phase and your target is to sell them for $50 per purchase, you may say, okay, I need $2,500 and I'm gonna generate the 50 purchases. But if you launch an ad and it just doesn't do very well and you're getting purchases for $100 instead, you'd need to spend the $5,000 to get out of the learning phase. You probably lose quite a bit of money. And if it's really underperforming, you may pause it or turn it off, or it's just not going to actually exit that learning phase properly. Anytime you launch an ad set, as it gets more and more people taking the desired action, it will get better at finding other people to take that action. So I do recommend trying to put a decent amount of money into each ad set, but specifically getting out of the learning phase, I don't believe is really that important, especially after doing all this research. So a question that a lot of people have had, let's say they're spending $500 or $1,000 a week, they're saying, wow, my budget really isn't going to let me get 50 purchases in a week. Should I instead try to optimize for add to carts or link clicks or something like that, where that $1,000 to spend in a week is actually going to let me exit the learning phase. If I'm aiming for purchases, I have overall had better luck trying to optimize for purchases, even if I know it's unlikely to exit the learning phase and go to active and we'll get moved to learning limited. I could target 20 or 30 or 40 purchases in a week, and that will still likely outperform targeting, let's say, link clicks, even if I know that that will actually leave the learning phase properly. Generally, my manual bids actually ended up in learning limited because you're really setting a cap on the exact amount of money that you're willing to spend. But the performance was still really, really solid, and it's still a great part of my strategy. If you want to learn more about manual and automatic bids, I did a full tutorial going really in depth on that. Make sure you put some money toward your ad set and try to generate a decent number of conversions in that first week, but I believe learning phase is highly overrated. You don't have to care hardly at all if you move to learning limited instead of active.